In 2025, a major Hollywood studio spent $300 million producing this live-action remake of Snow White.
Right.
And it was meant to be this crowning achievement, like a massive cultural moment.
Yeah, a total blockbuster.
Exactly. But instead, the audience just fundamentally rejected it. I mean, it's grossed a microscopic $25 million at the box office.
This is just a catastrophic failure.
Totally. And then, in that exact same year, thousands of 4-year-old boys were expelled from public preschools, like before they could even read a single word.
Yeah, it's wild.
So what on earth could those two completely disparate facts possibly have in common?
I mean, on the surface, nothing.
Right, but they're actually symptoms of the exact same disease. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling our morning roundup. And our daily mission here is to take this massive, seemingly disconnected stack of the day's sources, articles, historical research, cultural commentary, educational data, and we find the hidden thread that ties them all together.
I mean, the thread we found in today's stack is just glaring.
It really is.
Yeah. When you lay all these materials out on the table, the box office disasters, the childhood development statistics, ancient church history, the modern UFO narrative, and even like the thrifting habits of Gen Z.
Oh, the thrifting thing is fascinating.
Right. But when you look at it all together, a very stark overarching theme emerges. We are witnessing a massive multi-front battle between the authentic and the synthetic.
The authentic and the synthetic. It's a total cultural clash.
Exactly.
Because across every domain we look at today, there is a rebellion brewing. People are fundamentally rejecting these manufactured, cynical systems.
Yeah, they're starving for organic truth.
Right, and they're pushing back against institutions that are basically trying to force-feed them plastic. And look, we are going to get into some highly charged dynamics today.
Definitely. We're touching on politics, gender, religion, education.
The whole 9 yards. But, as always, you know our ethos here. Our job isn't to hold your hand or soften the blow. We are going to present the arguments from these sources impartially, just exactly as they appear.
We're not taking sides.
Never. We're just going to break down the mechanisms of how these arguments work, probably push some buttons, challenge your worldview, and then give you the actionable steps at the end. You decide what to do with it.
So, to understand why people are so desperately seeking authenticity right now, we first have to, diagnose the rot.
Yeah.
We have to look at how modern systems are serving up what can really only be described as synthetic substitutes for real human experience.
Synthetic garbage, basically.
Right. And the most glaring example in our sources today starts with entertainment and consumer goods.
Sure.
We're looking at a system that has developed a profound contempt for its own audience.
Let's start with that Snow White movie. $300 million to produce, tens of millions to market, and it practically evaporated on impact.
Just gone.
But the source we have compares that disaster to another film released in the exact same window, Project Hail Mary.
Which was incredible, by the way.
Right, and that one cleared $640 million worldwide. It was a colossal, undeniable hit.
And the contrast there is what actually matters. Because when these massive franchise films flop, the industry trades always trot out the exact same phrase. They call it franchise fatigue.
Or superhero fatigue.
Right. But the source absolutely tears this excuse apart.
Oh, it destroys it.
Yeah, the author calls it an empty diagnosis that accidentally reveals the industry's own arrogance. Because think about what franchise fatigue actually implies.
Right.
It implies that the product they made is perfectly fine, but you, the consumer, are just too tired or maybe too unsophisticated to appreciate it.
It's placing the blame entirely on the audience. I mean, if Superman flops, it's your fault. If Snow White tanks, well, you just have fatigue.
Exactly.
But the source asks this really obvious question. How can you claim audience fatigue when a movie like, say, Spider-Man, No Way Home pulled in nearly $2 billion during a global lockdown, while movies like Eternals completely bombed in that exact same year?
You can't. It makes no sense.
It has absolutely nothing to do with fatigue. The real issue is cynicism.
Yeah, and the analysis traces this shift back to roughly 2013. Around that time, the entertainment industry began trading the language of wonder, optimism, heroism.
The stuff that actually inspires people.
Right. They traded all of that for a language of deep pessimism. And the signature storytelling move of the last 15 years became what they call the deconstruction treatment.
Okay, I want to break down what that actually means mechanically, because you throw the word deconstruction around a lot.
Yeah, it gets overused.
It does. But this is where a writer takes a classic protagonist, someone the audience has a decades-long, deeply positive emotional connection to, like Luke Skywalker or Indiana Jones or Bruce Banner.
Right, heroes.
And they reintroduced them not as a hero, but as a broken, depressed, miserable husk of a human being.
They systematically undermine the character's legacy.
Mm.
Because the writers, well, they no longer believe that protagonists should embody those humanity-first values or genuine heroism.
Yep.
So they tear down the original character.
Mm.
And this is the crucial part, they introduce a newer, flawless character to literally lecture the broken hero about their failures.
I have to throw an analogy in here because reading this part of the source just drove me crazy.
Go for it.
Imagine sitting down at a Michelin star restaurant. You are paying a premium for a meal, but the chef in the kitchen secretly despises the very concept of food.
Like he just hates eating.
Right? He thinks human hunger is gross. He thinks enjoying a meal is primitive, so he cooks you something bitter, something intentionally difficult to swallow, just to teach you a lesson about your own palate.
Wow.
And when you refuse to eat it, he storms out of the kitchen and calls you uncultured. That is what modern Hollywood is doing. They're robbing characters of their actual humanity.
That's a great way to put it.
Because real growth, authentic growth, it requires suffering, right? Aren't these writers robbing the characters of their actual humanity by making them perfect from page one?
That is a crucial psychological point the source makes. A real protagonist starts out flawed. They're afraid. They're vulnerable.
Yeah, they mess up.
Exactly. They have to earn their victory through trial and error. But modern media hands out fake, synthetic victories.
Unearned.
Completely unearned. The newer characters we see are constantly told they've had the power inside them all along. They just need to realize how innately special they already are.
But real life doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. Growth hurts. You fail before you succeed. Pretending that you are gifted and perfect from page one is a synthetic lie. And audiences, they intuitively reject it because it just doesn't map onto the reality of the human condition.
But okay, why would writers do this? If your entire job is to entertain people, why would you actively write scripts that alienate them?
That's a great question. And the source points to what it calls the MFA pipeline.
Right, the Master of Fine Arts pipeline.
Yeah. The problem isn't a lack of technical storytelling craft. It is a sociological filter. The American entertainment industry pulls its writing talent almost exclusively from a very narrow funnel, a handful of MFA programs in coastal cities, which are then reinforced by these specific insular online tastemaker circles.
Wait, I want to push back on that a bit. Isn't an MFA program just supposed to teach you screenwriting structure? Like, how does taking a master's class on character arcs actively teach you to have contempt for the audience?
Well, it's not the curriculum of formatting a script, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the cultural osmosis of those specific academic environments.
Ah, okay.
By the time these writers actually get a job at a major studio, they have been marinated for a decade in a worldview that views traditional, everyday values as inherently problematic.
Wow.
Yeah. The source argues that concepts like traditional marriage, patriotism, religion, or even just working-class blue-collar life, they are coded within these circles as regressive or even bigoted.
So they literally cannot write relatable protagonists because they view the audience's actual everyday lives as something that needs to be corrected?
Precisely.
They see themselves as, like, the enlightened minds sent down from the mountain to educate the unwashed masses.
They're manufacturing a synthetic product laced with sincere cynicism.
And that profound contempt, it doesn't stop at the movie screen.
No, it doesn't.
It bleeds directly into the physical, tangible items we bring into our homes. The source connects this narrative cynicism to corporate enshittification and skimpflation.
Enshittification. I know it's a vulgar term, but it perfectly describes the phenomenon.
It really does.
This isn't just standard inflation where a product gets more expensive. This is where a company secretly reduces the fundamental quality of a product, hollows it out from the inside, but still charges you the exact same premium price.
And the source uses IKEA furniture as the prime example.
Right. For decades, IKEA was the gold standard for affordable, democratic design.
Everyone had it.
Everyone. And the social contract was clear. It's inexpensive, you have to assemble it yourself, but it is made of solid particle board, or MDF. It will survive a few moves.
Yeah, you could take it to college and back.
Exactly. But the source highlights how many of their pieces have recently devolved from particle board to literal corrugated cardboard.
They are selling people paper folded into a honeycomb pattern, wrapping it in a thin veneer, and marketing it as furniture.
And they market it as lightweight or optimized for transport.
Which sounds nice.
It sounds great, but the reality is a massive breach of trust. You are exchanging the hours of your life, your wages, for a physical object that will disintegrate if a glass of water sweats on it.
Which brings us to the reaction from Gen Z. Because if you look at the massive surge in thrifting, collecting physical media like vinyl and DVDs, learning to sew, buying heavy vintage goods, the mainstream media usually frames all of that as a cute environmental trend.
Right, like, oh, the kids care about sustainability.
Exactly.
But the source argues it is much darker and much deeper than that. The author calls it a survival aesthetic. They say it's a trauma response.
Okay, I need you to unpack that because trauma response sounds like an incredibly dramatic phrase to use for, buying a vintage denim jacket at a thrift store.
I get that, but it makes sense when you view it systematically.
Okay.
Gen Z is reacting to an unfathomable level of hostility from the systems around them. They feel like they're constantly being treated as marks in a con game.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. They go to the movies, and the script tells them their values are toxic. They buy a desk, and it's made of cardboard. They subscribe to a streaming service, and the movie they love is just deleted forever for a tax write-off.
They literally don't own anything.
Exactly. The modern corporate machine is replacing durable, earned quality with cheap synthetic substitutes at every possible touchpoint.
So going to a thrift store and buying a solid oak chair from 1982 or buying a physical DVD that a corporation can't just remotely delete from your library that is a way of anchoring yourself in reality.
Yes.
It's a desperate grasp for the authentic in a world that is trying to drown you in the synthetic.
And that leads us to a much more severe implication.
Right.
If our culture and our corporations are pushing synthetic values on our screens and in our living rooms, what happens to the human beings who naturally, biologically, do not fit into those synthetic boxes?
This is where it gets really dark.
We move from corporate contempt to institutional pathologizing.
So we are looking at how modern institutions handle the natural order of human behavior. And we're going to focus first on the education system's treatment of boys.
Yeah.
The statistics in this source, which was written by an educator with over a decade of experience in the system, they are just staggering. And the punishment starts on day one. In public preschool programs, boys make up roughly 54% of enrollments.
About half.
Right. But they make up 80% of preschool suspensions.
And 85% of preschool expulsions.
Wow.
We are talking about 4-year-old children here. Before they can read, before they even fully understand emotional regulation, the system is permanently flagging boys as behavioral liabilities.
I read that and immediately thought, what are 4-year-olds even doing to get suspended? Are they forming gangs?
Right.
No. The source argues this isn't because teachers are maliciously targeting boys. It's because the physical environment and the required metrics of a modern classroom are built around a specific set of behaviors that young male brains are biologically and neurologically not wired to perform for 8 hours a day.
And the structural bias reveals itself undeniably when you look at the research on grading.
This part was wild.
It really is. The source cites extensive data on blind versus non-blind grading. So when tests are graded blindly, meaning the teacher only sees the answers and does not know whose paper they are grading, boys score equally well, or in some subjects better, than girls.
But the moment the teachers see the names on the paper, the grades diverge. Boys receive lower grades for providing the exact same academic answers as the girls.
And the underlying mechanism here is profound. Schools do not grade academic knowledge in a vacuum. They grade two things simultaneously as a single blended metric: academic knowledge and behavioral compliance.
Compliance?
Yes. How neatly do you write? How still do you sit? How smoothly do you transition between tasks without making noise?
And developmental psychology shows that a 6-year-old girl is roughly 18 months ahead of a 6-year-old boy in terms of fine motor skills, sitting still, and emotional attunement to authority figures.
18 months is huge at that age.
It's a lifetime. So the system takes natural male impulsivity, physical energy, and slower fine motor development and penalizes it.
Right.
The boy might understand the math concept perfectly, but because his paper is crumpled and he tapped his pencil the whole time, his grade drops. The school is grading down for compliance, but disguising it on the report card as academic failure.
Which feeds directly into the massive pipeline of ADHD diagnoses. The source notes that 13.5% of boys are diagnosed with ADHD compared to just 8% of girls.
But the absolute smoking gun in the data, the thing that proves this is a systemic failure and not a biological epidemic, is the birth date data.
Yes, the August versus September birth date phenomenon.
Walk us through that.
So in most school districts, The cutoff date to enter a grade is early September. This means boys born in August are the absolute youngest kids in their class, while boys born in September are the oldest.
And the source shows that the August boys are diagnosed with ADHD and medicated at dramatically higher rates than the September boys.
Dramatically higher.
But they don't have a neurological disorder. They are just 11 months younger.
Right.
At 6 years old, 11 months is a massive developmental chasm. But because the younger boys can't sit as still as the older kids, the system pathologizes normal developmental variation. They drug the boys to force them to fit the synthetic environment rather than changing the environment to fit the boys.
The long-term cost of this institutional friction is devastating. By high school, boys make up the bottom two-thirds of the lowest GPAs.
That is tragic.
And because GPA is the primary metric for college entry, the entire higher education pipeline is flipped. Women now earn 60% of all master's degrees.
And I want to push back on the assumption that people often make here that boys are just lazy now.
Oh, yeah.
If the blind test scores prove the intelligence is there, then the GPA isn't a measure of intellect, it's a measure of compliance. And the psychological toll is what really got me. The source cites a 2025 study showing that by the 9th grade, 34% of boys report having no vision for their future at age 30.
34%.
Think about that. Over a third of young men have had their drive completely extinguished. They've spent 9 straight years being told that their natural energy is a problem, their messy handwriting is a failure, and their lack of compliance is a moral flaw.
The institution is enforcing a synthetic standard over a natural reality. And our next source takes this exact same dynamic, twisting the natural order to enforce compliance, and examines it within modern religious institutions.
Now, we are moving into a highly provocative argument regarding gender dynamics in modern Christianity. And just a quick reminder, to be clear, we are presenting the mechanics of this argument impartially, exactly as the source lays it out.
We're just reporting what the author says.
Exactly. So the source asserts that according to historical biblical texts, there is a natural hierarchical order to the family and the church. God, then men, then women, and then children. But the author claims that modern Christian women, enabled by church leadership, have completely inverted this order.
The claim is that the actual functional hierarchy in modern churches looks like this. Women are at the top of the decision-making tree, then the pastor, then the children, then pets, then marginalized groups, and finally, men sit at the absolute bottom.
Okay, how does that actually work mechanically? Like, if a church claims to believe the Bible, how does the source argue they flip the hierarchy without admitting it?
The source introduces the mechanism of conditional obedience.
Conditional obedience.
Right. The author argues that women will verbally agree to the concept of biblical submission, but they attach vague, constantly moving goalposts to it. A wife might say, "I will obey my husband's leadership, but only if he leads exactly like Christ." Or, "I will follow him, but only if he holds space for me to be in my feminine energy."
Okay, I have to challenge this.
Go ahead.
Isn't conditional obedience just another phrase for having healthy boundaries?
No.
Like, you shouldn't blindly follow someone who is leading you off a cliff or acting abusively.
Well, the source is not arguing for the tolerance of abuse.
Okay.
The source is arguing about the structural integrity of a hierarchy. The author compares it to a political or military chain of command. Imagine if Vice President J.D. Vance told Donald Trump, "I will only execute your orders if you lead the country exactly the way I personally interpret leadership."
Oh, wow. He would be fired instantly.
Instantly. Because a conditional hierarchy, where the subordinate decides on a case-by-case basis if the leader is worthy of being followed, is not a hierarchy at all. It is a veto power.
Right.
In the context of the home, the source argues these vague theological demands allow the wife to manipulate Scripture to maintain absolute control of the household while pretending to be submissive.
And where does the church pastor fit into this dynamic? Why would the leadership support this inversion?
Economics and demographics. The source points out that women largely control household finances and dictate church attendance.
It's true.
If the wife is unhappy, the family leaves and the tithe goes with them. Pastors, needing to keep the lights on and the budget balanced, they must cater to the primary consumer.
So the pastor basically transforms from a spiritual authority into like an event planner. They focus on emotional aesthetics, aesthetic snack tables, progressive flags, and sermons that strictly validate the feelings of the female audience.
Furthermore, the source argues the pastor effectively becomes an enforcer for the wife.
An enforcer.
Yeah. If the husband attempts to lead in a way the wife dislikes, she bypasses the husband and goes to the pastor. The pastor then takes the husband aside and nags him under the spiritual guise of, you aren't loving your wife like Christ loved the church.
The parallel here is incredible. Just as the modern school system punishes natural male biology to enforce a synthetic, compliant classroom environment, this source argues that modern religious institutions have abandoned their foundational texts to enforce a synthetic, consumer-driven, female-centric hierarchy.
It's the exact same mechanism.
In both cases, the authentic historical structure is pathologized to serve the needs of the system.
And that brings us to the inevitable breaking point. If the physical world is offering you cardboard furniture for a premium price, cynical movies that hold you in contempt, schools that drug you for being a boy, and institutions that gaslight your understanding of reality, where do you go?
You escape. You seek out a reality where you feel safe, powerful, and understood. But as our next segment shows, even our escapism has been completely hijacked.
Yeah, it has.
Let's talk about manufactured mythologies.
When people feel entirely disconnected from authentic reality, the human brain still craves awe, wonder, and meaning. And our first source in this segment looks at the ultimate macro-escapism, the UFO mythos.
I love this source by Jay Dyer because it completely flips the script on how we talk about aliens.
Yeah.
He argues that the modern UFO phenomenon is absolutely not what you think it is.
No, not at all.
We aren't talking about little green men from Mars crashing tinfoil ships in the desert. Dyer argues that the alien narrative is a manufactured neo-Gnostic mythos.
Let's define that term because it's central to his argument.
Please do.
Gnosticism was an ancient heresy that taught the physical world was a flawed, evil prison created by a lesser god, and that salvation could only be achieved by acquiring secret elite knowledge or gnosis.
Okay.
Dyer argues the modern UFO narrative is just a sci-fi reskin of this ancient religion.
And the historical breadcrumbs he lays out are wild. He traces the origins of the modern alien narrative back to the late 19th and early 20th century, specifically to writers like H.G. Wells.
Wait, Wells wasn't just a science fiction author. He was deeply connected to the Fabian Society.
The Fabian Society is critical context here. They were a British socialist organization dedicated to establishing a global technocratic government.
But they weren't like violent revolutionaries.
No, unlike revolutionaries who wanted violent overthrow, the Fabians believed in gradualism slowly changing culture through education, art, and subtle influence. Their original logo was literally a wolf in sheep's clothing.
That is so creepy.
It is. Dyer argues that Wells wrote War of the Worlds not just as a spooky story, but as psychological propaganda to seed the idea of an overwhelming extraterrestrial threat that would require humanity to dissolve its national borders and unite under a single global authority.
But it goes way beyond science fiction novels. The source points to actual declassified government documents. He brings up the 1949 Project Sign report by the U.S. military and a massive 1960 white paper produced by the Brookings Institute for NASA. The 1960 Brookings report is fascinating. It wasn't just about the physics of space travel. A significant portion of it was an exercise in sociological and religious engineering.
Really?
Yeah. They asked a fundamental question. If we announce the discovery of advanced extraterrestrials, how does that alter human religion and the stability of society?
But hold on, let me play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Isn't that just good science? I mean, if you are NASA in 1960 entering the space race, shouldn't you be running thought experiments on how the public might react to discovering life on Mars? Why is Dyer assuming this is an evil cabal trying to engineer a religion?
Dyer's argument rests on what happened next. It wasn't just a thought experiment. It became a cultural rollout. He points to places like the Esalen Institute in the 1960s.
Oh, Esalen.
Yeah, Esalen was the epicenter of the counterculture movement in California, blending Eastern mysticism, psychology, and the emerging UFO narrative.
The source literally talks about how boomer intellectuals and counterculture leaders were giving lectures at Esalen on trying to romantically, let's say, interface with aliens through meditation to achieve ascended status.
Yeah, they were trying to hunk aliens.
It sounds like absolute lunacy, but it was a deeply serious movement aiming to replace traditional Christianity.
The ultimate goal, according to Dyer's analysis, is control. The elites realized that an advanced space brother narrative is the perfect tool for psychological dominance.
Right.
They concocted a mythos that these aliens seeded humanity and that they are returning either to help us ascend to a higher consciousness or to destroy us if we don't disarm our nuclear weapons and unite under a one-world government.
If you think about it, it is the absolute perfect secular substitute for God. If the elites want to replace traditional religion with something that still triggers our awe and obedience, isn't an advanced, God-like alien the perfect secular substitute?
It fills the God-shaped hole in the human psyche perfectly.
Exactly, but it doesn't require any traditional morality, repentance, or historical liturgy. It is a synthetic theology designed to frighten the global population into accepting a technocratic New World Order.
And if UFOs represent the macro-escapism of a society looking at the sky for a synthetic savior, our next source looks at micro-escapism. It looks at the individual looking down at their phone. We are talking about addiction.
This source, from an author named Ryan Mack, tackles a very modern problem: why dopamine detoxes almost always fail. We've all seen the YouTube videos.
Oh, definitely.
A guy deletes Instagram, puts his phone on a lockbox, and stares at a wall for 48 hours to reset his brain, and 2 days later he is right back on the couch, doom scrolling for 5 hours straight.
Mack argues that the dopamine detox fails because it operates on a flawed premise. It treats the addiction solely as a chemical symptom, a mechanical loop of dopamine in the brain.
Just a biology problem.
Exactly. But it completely ignores the underlying spiritual and psychological void that the chemical hit is trying to medicate.
To prove this, he brings up one of the most incredible historical medical phenomena I've ever heard of: the Vietnam War heroin study.
This is a crazy story.
It is. During the war, the U.S. military realized that roughly 20% of soldiers in Vietnam had become heavily addicted to pure, potent heroin.
20%.
The government panicked. They set up massive task forces, expecting hundreds of thousands of junkies to return to American cities and cause an unprecedented crime wave.
But the crime wave never happened. The study tracked these soldiers and found that upon returning home, 95% of the addicted soldiers quit heroin almost immediately.
95%.
Overnight, without rehab, without methadone clinics, without therapy.
How is that physically possible? Heroin creates a severe chemical dependency. You can't just turn it off.
You can if the environment changes drastically enough. This mirrors the famous rat park experiments in psychology. The soldiers in Vietnam were in a terrifying, disconnected, high-stress environment. The heroin was medicating the absence of safety and connection.
That makes so much sense.
But when they came home, their core human needs, safety, connection to family, a sense of purpose in their civilian lives, were suddenly being met organically. The underlying void was filled, so the chemical hook of the drug lost its absolute power.
Mack takes this framework and applies it to our modern digital addictions. He breaks down human motivation into 8 core psychological needs. And he shows meticulously how modern apps and digital habits are engineered to perfectly mimic the fulfillment of these needs.
They are synthetic junk food for the soul.
Let's break a few of these down because the mechanics are eye-opening. Take video games. Why can a young man sit and grind a video game for 12 hours straight, leveling up a character, but he can't focus on his homework for 20 minutes?
Because the game provides a synthetic sense of competence and mastery.
In the real world, mastery takes years of grinding, failure, and boredom. The video game compresses that loop. You swing a sword, you get points, the number goes up, and the brain registers. I am becoming competent. I have autonomy.
It's instant.
You feel like you are achieving something vital to your survival, but you are manipulating digital air.
Look at pornography and the rise of digital lust. These platforms provide a synthetic form of connection and belonging, combined with extreme pleasure and absolute autonomy.
Which is a dangerous combo.
Very. You get the neurological rush of intimacy, but you maintain complete control of the environment, totally avoiding the messy vulnerability and risk of rejection required by real human interaction.
Mack also brings up the massive obsession with anime and manga. He notes that the deep, sprawling, heroic storylines provide a synthetic sense of meaning and purpose.
Right.
And because the characters are drawn and their reactions are ultimately predictable, they provide safety and security compared to real, unpredictable humans who might betray you.
Finally, look at doom scrolling on social media or constantly checking the news. Why do we consume things that make us angry or anxious?
It's so counterintuitive.
It is, but it provides a synthetic sense of safety. It gives you the illusion that by being informed about every tragedy on the globe, you are somehow protecting yourself.
Wow.
Combined with the absolute thumb-tip control you have over the feed, it creates a synthetic mastery over reality.
But the spiritual cost of this is catastrophic. Mack uses a biblical concept to explain the damage. He points to 1 Corinthians 10:21, the concept of the table of demons. The idea is that every human being has an appetite, a deep spiritual hunger, and you have to choose which table you are going to eat at.
And these digital synthetic addictions offer you a massive discount.
Right.
You get the feeling of connection without the work of a relationship. You get the feeling of mastery without the sweat of practice.
But the table of demons demands idolatry. Mack references Philippians 3:19, which warns of those whose God is their stomach. If you continually feed your deep spiritual hunger with synthetic digital junk food, your appetite takes over. Your cravings become your master.
It rewires you completely.
The neurological and spiritual result is a darkened heart, a scattered, frantic mind, and a complete loss of authentic presence in the physical world. You are literally eating cardboard.
And that leads to a brilliant, incredibly short source that completely shifted my perspective on where we actually should be looking to fill that void. It's an analysis of the Lord's Prayer.
Specifically Matthew 6:6, where Jesus says, "But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet."
For centuries, people have read that as quaint architectural advice. Go find a quiet coat closet, shut the door, and pray so no one sees you.
Right.
But the source digs into the linguistic and anatomical realities of the ancient world. The Greek word translated as closet is timion. In Greek architecture, it meant the innermost, most private chamber of a house, the room furthest from the noise of the street.
But the Greeks also use that exact same word in their anatomical studies.
This is the crazy part.
They use tamion to name the structure at the very center of the human brain, what we now call the thalamus. The thalamus is the relay center of the brain. All sensory information passes through it.
The implication here is staggering.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't giving architectural advice about finding a quiet room in your house. He was giving a literal anatomical map to the human mind.
Mind blown.
Right. He was telling people to go inside themselves, past the sensory noise of the external world, to their interior relay center to find God.
Let's tie this entire segment together. The UFO cults, the doom scrolling, the video games, the pornography, these are all external, synthetic searches for meaning.
Totally.
You are looking up at the sky for a spaceship to save you, or you are staring down at a glowing rectangle for a dopamine hit to soothe you. But the ancient texts were literally pointing us inward. They were telling us that the authentic spiritual reality is an internal, physically embodied experience.
Which serves as the perfect transition into our final segment, the anchor of authentic embodied truth. We've spent this entire deep dive diagnosing the synthetic rot in our movies, our furniture, our schools, our churches, and our coping mechanisms.
So the ultimate question is, what does authentic tradition actually look like?
To answer that, we have to look at sources that point away from the screen and toward historical, physical realities.
And the first source in this final batch starts with a harsh critique of what many people think is a return to tradition, modern political populism. We have an analysis from a British commentator known as Richard IV, titled 5 Reasons Populism is a Busted Flush.
Richard IV analyzes the recent ways of right-wing populist movements and street marches in Britain, and his critique is razor sharp. He points out specific, jarring images from these movements.
Like what?
For example, a video of a 10-year-old boy at a rally screaming vile obscenities about Allah, or political figures like Valentina Gomez posting crass, borderline illiterate videos saying things like Plan B is for boats when talking about complex deportation policies.
Oh, wait, I have to play devil's advocate again here.
Do it.
Isn't populism supposed to be the working class pushing back against the synthetic elite? Isn't waving the national flag or holding up a cross a return to traditional roots?
Richard IV argues that waving a flag is merely symbology. It is not substance. He compares these political rallies to the bitter rivalry between fans of the Celtic and Rangers soccer teams in Scotland.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah. Historically, Celtic fans are Catholic and Rangers fans are Protestant. They will brawl in the streets over these identities, but if you actually ask them, almost none of the fans fighting in the streets actually go to church, take communion, or know anything about theology.
Just a team jersey.
The religion is just a hollow cultural signifier used to justify a tribal street brawl.
Exactly. I mean, it's spot on. The critique is that modern populism is not a genuine return to tradition. It operates as a deeply modern, mass outrage, low IQ liberal movement.
Yeah.
It lacks true metaphysics. It lacks a spiritual hierarchy. It demands no personal moral reform from its followers. It has no living, breathing tradition. It is just a reactionary rage cycle constantly emotionally triggered and fed by the social media algorithm. It is a synthetic imitation of a civilization.
So if populism is a fake, synthetic tradition, what is a real one? Our next sources from theological commentators J. Dyer and Jim Bob dive into the absolute necessity of the physical historical church. They specifically contrast the ancient Eastern Orthodox view of authority with the Protestant concept of sola scriptura.
Let's define sola scriptura for everyone.
Mhm.
It's a Latin phrase meaning scripture alone, and it is the foundational belief of the Protestant Reformation that the Bible is the sole, ultimate, and infallible authority for Christian faith and practice.
Right.
But Dyer and Jim Bob critique this by outlining what they call the Protestant dilemma.
The dilemma is an epistemological problem. They argue that treating the Bible as an ontologically unique object that somehow interprets itself is logically impossible. A text cannot read itself. A text cannot apply its own rules to a novel situation.
I love the analogy they use to explain this because it clarifies the philosophy instantly.
The court one.
Yeah. It's like taking the United States Constitution, walking into a federal courtroom, placing the piece of parchment in the judge's leather chair, and expecting the paper to run the trial, listen to the evidence, and issue a verdict.
It is absurd.
It is. A text, no matter how divinely inspired or sacred, requires an authoritative, living interpreter to apply it.
Furthermore, they argue that because of this textual isolation, modern Western Christianity has become entirely mental and digitized.
Very true.
People believe they can be a Christian purely in their head. They stay home on Sunday, watch a debate on YouTube, read a verse on an app, and consider their spiritual duty fulfilled.
It's fascinating that the modern reflex is to go it alone, just me and my Bible or me and my podcast. But these sources are arguing that true, authentic faith requires physical embodiment. You cannot download a sacrament.
You really can't.
You must go to a physical parish. You must interact with the messy, annoying people in your community. You must participate in the physical liturgy, tasting the bread, drinking the wine, feeling the water of baptism. Authentic truth demands physical, spatial reality. It demands a historical church.
And if we are talking about the historical church, our next source provides an incredible masterclass on what authentic, organic church authority actually looked like before the modern era. We have a deep dive from Father Andrew Hera into the history of the ancient British Church.
Father Hera's central thesis is fascinating. He argues that the ancient British Church was organically independent. It was not a synthetic, top-down corporate structure managed by a pope sitting in an office in Rome.
No, it was a living tradition that governed itself.
He backs this up with 5 distinct historical proofs, spanning several centuries. First, he looks at the independent origin of the Church. At the Council of Arles in 314 AD, just after Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, British bishops were present.
They were there.
But they were there as full, equal members of the Catholic Communion, operating entirely independently of Roman jurisdiction. He cites the 6th canon of the Council of Nicaea, which explicitly limited the Pope's jurisdiction to suburbicarian regions, meaning the areas immediately surrounding Rome and central Italy. Britain was thousands of miles outside that zone.
Then he moves to the early 400s, during the Pelagian crisis.
Yeah.
Pelagianism was a massive heresy that broke out in Britain, basically teaching that humans could earn salvation without divine grace.
So what did they do?
Well, does the British Church write to the Pope for orders on how to handle it? No. They write to the church in Gaul, modern-day France, and ask bishops Germanus and Lupus to come over and help them debate the heretics. As Father Hurro points out, the British ask for theological competence, not Roman jurisdiction.
The most dramatic piece of evidence comes a couple of centuries later, around 603 AD. Pope Gregory the Great had sent a missionary named Augustine of Canterbury to Britain, explicitly to bring the independent British bishops under papal authority. They hold 2 conferences at a place called Augustine's Oak.
This is my favorite story in the entire stack today.
It's so good.
The British bishops are skeptical of Augustine's demands, so they consult a wise local hermit. The hermit tells them to set up a test to see if Augustine has the authentic fruit of the Holy Spirit. He tells them, when you arrive in the meeting, see what Augustine does. If he stands up to greet you as equals, he is a humble man of God, and you should listen to him. If he remains seated, he is arrogant, and you should reject him.
It's such a simple, practical test.
Right. So the British bishops arrive. Augustine stays seated in his chair. He fails the humility test. And the British bishops flatly refuse his authority, telling him to his face they will not have him as their archbishop.
Wow.
Father Hur's point is brilliant. You do not do that, if you already believe the Pope in Rome has supreme, unquestionable divine authority over you. You only do that if you believe church authority is a peer-based organic brotherhood.
Finally, Father Hurrah addresses the Synod of Whitby in 664 AD. A lot of historians mistakenly point to this event as the moment Britain officially submitted to Rome. But Hurrah clarifies the context. It wasn't a debate about papal supremacy. It was merely a dispute over calculating the date of Easter.
Which is a big deal back then.
Huge. Half the kingdom was celebrating Easter while the other half was still fasting for Lent. It was causing total chaos.
King Oswy of Northumbria oversaw the synod. He listened to the arguments from the Celtic monks and the Roman monks. He ultimately made a personal, pious choice to side with the Roman calendar because he read that St. Peter held the keys to heaven, and he joked that he didn't want to be locked out of the pearly gates when he died.
That's hilarious.
It was a calendar decision based on a king's personal piety, absolutely not a canonical, theological submission of the British Church to papal jurisdiction.
The overarching point of all this dense history is that authentic church authority wasn't a corporate memo sent from a CEO in Rome. It was organic, localized, tested by humility, and historically earned. You can be authentically Catholic, part of the universal church, without being a middle management branch of a synthetic corporation.
Which brings us to the ultimate final cost of authenticity. We've touched on it throughout the hour, but our final two sources drive it home. Authentic truth requires earned suffering. We start with a historian analyzing the accounts of the resurrection of Jesus.
This is a brilliant detail about how historians verify ancient texts. The source points out that in all four gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John women are explicitly named as the very first witnesses to the empty tomb and the risen Jesus.
Yes, all four.
But if you look at later, official church tradition like the creed Paul recites in 1 Corinthians 15, the church completely airbrushed the women out of the story, listing only the male apostles as witnesses.
Why the discrepancy? Because in the ancient Greco-Roman and Jewish world, women were fundamentally not considered credible witnesses in a court of law. Their testimony was legally useless. The historian argues that this sociological fact proves the absolute authenticity of the original gospel accounts. It's called the criterion of embarrassment.
Think about it. If you were sitting in a room inventing a synthetic mythology to convince the patriarchal ancient world that your leader rose from the dead, you would never write the script so that women were your primary witnesses.
You'd be laughed out of the room.
Exactly. You'd be intentionally shooting your own credibility in the foot. The only logical reason the women are centered in the narrative is because it actually happened that way, and the writers were bound to the authentic truth, even when it was culturally embarrassing.
Contrast that profound commitment to authentic vulnerability with the cynical Hollywood writers from our first segment, who absolutely refuse to let their modern synthetic characters suffer, look weak, or need help. Which leads us to our final source, commentator Paul Vanderklay discussing the Apostle Paul.
Vanderklay paints an incredibly vivid picture. Look at Paul's life. He was a high-status, highly educated Pharisee. He had power, but he ends his life sitting in heavy iron chains in a damp Roman prison, awaiting execution by beheading under the psychotic Emperor Nero.
Yeah, his life was brutal.
From a cynical, modern perspective, his life looks like a complete, utter failure. He lost everything.
But Paul isn't bitter in that cell. He is writing letters to the church in Philippi, and the letters are overflowing with joy. How is that possible? Vanderklay uses the analogy of a mother in labor. Childbirth in the ancient world was agonizing, terrifying, and incredibly deadly. Women knew the risks, but they endured the agony for the anticipation of the child.
Because suffering makes absolutely no sense without the anticipation of fruit. Paul endured his imprisonment, his beatings, the shipwrecks, and the chains like a mother enduring labor. He was suffering for his spiritual children in Philippi, and he was awaiting the day of Christ Jesus, a day of ultimate perfect judgment and vindication.
And this synthesizes everything we've talked about today. The reason Paul's witness survived, the reason the early church survived the brutal machinery of the Roman Empire, and the reason we are so desperately craving authentic stories today is because real growth, real authority, and real truth require embodied suffering and earned history.
You cannot fake it. You cannot fake a hero with this cynical Hollywood script that skips the hero's journey. You cannot fake a thriving boy by forcing him into a compliant, medicated box. You cannot fake spiritual fulfillment with a dopamine hit from a glowing rectangle. And you cannot fake a living historical tradition with an angry populist march or an online avatar. Authentic reality demands your physical presence, your humility, and your willingness to endure the fire.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, it is time for your action plan. We've diagnosed the problem, we've analyzed the history, but knowledge is useless without application. Based on today's morning roundup of sources, we have 4 concrete, actionable steps for you to take.
Step 1. Audit your media and your consumption. I want you to ask yourself a hard, uncomfortable question today. Do the stories you watch and the products you buy respect you? Or do they hold you in contempt? Look at the screen. Look at your furniture. Stop handing your hard-earned wages over to enshittified, cynical corporations that view your existence as a problem to be solved or a mark to be conned. Demand the authentic.
Step 2. Check the grading scale in your own home. If you have a son in the modern education system, you must actively, consciously separate his innate intelligence from his institutional compliance grade. Do not let his synthetic system pathologize his natural biology. And most importantly, you must find him an arena outside of the school walls, whether that is a physical sport, a mechanical trade, a wilderness project where his natural drive and energy can result in a tangible, measurable win. He needs that psychological oxygen to survive.
Step 3. Identify your table. Take a brutally honest look at your daily habits. The doom scrolling on Twitter, the 3 hours of video games, the junk food, the pornography. Map those habits back to the 8 core human needs we discussed. Realize that you are not just seeking a cheap chemical dopamine hit. You are profoundly spiritually hungry. You have an appetite. You have to make a conscious daily choice about which table you're eating at because your stomach makes a terrible tyrannical god.
Step 4. Get offline and get embodied. Stop treating digital online spaces as a substitute for real community, real hierarchy, and real physical presence. You cannot live a liturgical, authentic life in the comment section of a YouTube video. You have to step out of the digital matrix and into the messy physical world.
And speaking of going deeper, that is our final call to action for you. We highly encourage you to check the show notes. We have linked every single original source, article, and historical document we discussed today. Don't just take our word for it. Go read them, watch them, understand the mechanisms for yourself. If this deep dive challenged you, if it made you view the world a little differently today, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. It is the only way we grow and continue doing these deep dives.
It has been a heavy stack of sources today, navigating through some dense history and psychology, but it's an incredibly vital conversation for the moment we are living in.
It really is. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We spent this entire time talking about how modern systems manufacture fake heroes, fake meaning, and fake authority. But turn the mirror around. Ask yourself this. In your own life, when the pressure mounts and things get difficult, do you embrace the suffering to earn your own growth, like Paul sitting in his Roman prison cell? Or do you quietly wait for a cynical Hollywood writer to tap you on the shoulder and tell you that you were perfect all along? The authentic life is waiting for you out there, but you have to be willing to bleed for it.